It's on. Hello and welcome to our Blended Learning Essentials Getting Started on Air Hangout. The welcome is for those of you who are watching the recording, and as we get started we will hopefully see people joining us live on this Google Live Hangout. So until then we'll just speak to the audience who are watching this in return, and as people join we'll say a special hello to them. So welcome to this, however you're watching it. It may be back in the Google Hangout as a recording, or it may be on YouTube. We hope you find this useful. The purpose of these sessions is twofold. Firstly, to answer participants' questions live using an alternative format, and secondly to show participants the power of a tool such as Google Hangout to interact and participate with your learners, to give you a sense of what it feels like to be a learner in this kind of scenario, and to give you hopefully the confidence to try this kind of tool out yourself with your learners. We're very fortunate to be joined by Diana Laurillard, who's here on the screen now, so I can flick between presenters. Diana, if you want to say hello.
Hello, and I'll speak when you allow me to, Neil.
Thank you. I feel like a disc jockey on the radio.
Yeah. You look like one, actually.
Yeah, thank you, Diana. So we'll. This is the first time I'm using this headset. I feel a bit like Mickey Mouse, to be honest. But it is a very useful tool for people who are doing a lot of online work, because you don't get the feedback through the speakers, and it gives you a better audio experience. So if you're doing a lot of online work, it's worth investing in these terrible looking but good quality pieces of equipment. So today we've gathered questions in advance on the FutureLearn platform. The course is Blended Learning Essentials Getting Started. If you're joining us off Twitter, we've posted a link directly to the Google Hangout, so you may know nothing about the course and have just seen this on Twitter. This Hangout's associated with our course Blended Learning Essentials, and the participants of that course have been posting questions leading up to this Q&A. So Diana and I have those questions, and we're going to go through and answer that as many as we can. But we also have questions directly in this Hangout, and if you're joining us live, you can post your questions directly in the Q&A, and we can pick those up as we're speaking. And we're also taking questions from Twitter. So if you see my eyes flying around the screen, it's because I'm trying to keep an eye on what's going on Twitter, to be able to try and answer your questions there. So I promised we'd welcome the live viewers, and we now have a number of live viewers who have joined us, and that number will probably fluctuate during the session, and I, as the presenter, and Diana can see the number of people that are live with us, so that gives us some reassurance that we're not speaking to ourselves. So we'll start off with some of the questions we've had from the platform, and then we'll pull in some of the questions that come in live. If you're joining us live, feel free to say hi, just to try out the technology or to answer us a question. Okay, so we've got a bunch of questions from the platform that some are in groups, so we may not answer your specific question, but we'll try and answer all of the questions that have come in. So there's been a number of questions about virtual learning environments and open educational resources, because that's the topic that we've been looking at this week of the course, which is the third week of the course. And a number of people are asking about the kind of limitations, I think, of open educational resources. So we in the course talk about the value of open educational resources, the ways in which you can find them and their potential uses in your teaching practice, but also some of the limitations. And the question that we've had on the platform really is sort of saying, well, are these things free? And do we know they're free? How do we make sure we don't go about all this work searching for them and then find out that there's a paid service? So OERs should normally be free. That's kind of part of the principle behind them. So they're open educational resources. So we would hope that they are free. The only real way to define an open educational resource is through its license, so through the Creative Commons license, which is about distribution, reuse, remixing, etc. But it is possible that people could charge for an open educational resource. There is a license in Creative Commons that does allow for commercial use. So we don't always know it unless we're very adept at looking at the licenses. So you need to become familiar with the 6 categories of Creative Commons licenses. And then there was a follow-up question on that, which was about VLEs. So I'll just deal with that whilst we're here. So do VLEs need to be supported by IT gurus? I like that use of the word gurus. So VLEs are generally supported by an IT support service. They generally need maintenance, upgrade, and systems development. So they aren't really something that you would normally, as an educator, run and maintain yourself, although people do run Moodle instances themselves, and Moodle is a much easier VLE to manage and to host and to serve out to people. But a VLE like Blackboard, you wouldn't ordinarily run that yourself. So that was the first question that was on my list. So there's a question I'm going to ask Diana to do, because I've answered this question a number of times when we've run the course before, and Diana was travelling, and it's relevant to travelling, Diana. There's 3 or 4 questions that are from our international participants, and we have a large number of people from around the world joining the course. And it's the same question phrased in a different number of ways, but it's this concern about teachers' ability to integrate technology into their teaching practice because of learners' inability to either access that content because of broadband or because of lack of access to devices. And there's a lot of people asking for our advice about how to overcome this. Do you want to have a crack at that?
Yeah, it's am I still on?
Yeah.
I am. Okay, good. I mean, it plagues all of us, because whatever level of technology you get to, and in the UK now, we're incredibly well off in many ways. But top of the news today were problems about broadband and how imperfect broadband is in many parts of the country still, even in parts of London. So that creates a big problem for a teacher who has a class of learners, 30-odd learners, only some of whom have proper access at home or in the workplace. Quite a lot of workplaces don't allow you to use their own technology, so that can be another kind of problem. So it doesn't matter how sophisticated you get, the infrastructure is never designed for what educators need and what learners need. So we're always riding on the back of what other kinds of organizations and other institutions are making available to us. In fact, I was in a conference just a couple of weeks ago where David Putnam, who is one of the key people in the House of Lords who's pushing this area of technology, he gives lectures all over the world, famous film director, it's the sort of thing he does, and he was complaining bitterly about how badly this kind of thing is supported everywhere. So I'm afraid it's a problem which is always going to be with us. There are specific problems in the developing countries where they have much less good access than we do, and our students have less good access to the quality of desktops, laptops, tablets, and so on. However, in many of those countries, there are cheaper versions of these technologies now becoming available. We ran a MOOC that was running internationally a year or so ago on ICT in primary education. Primary education is very badly so. But even so, we had 1,300 people from those countries which are targeted by international development as being the most difficult. So we had 1,300 teachers from those countries. Now, admittedly, their students aren't necessarily going to have access, but their students will very often sometimes have access to mobile devices. So even smartphones are beginning to get into some places. So for those kinds of teachers, what we should be doing is advising on what you can do with something like a smartphone, and you'll find that a number of our activities are designed around that kind of tool as well. So that's one way in which we can help those kinds of learners, is by helping their teachers understand what their learners can make use of. Also, of course, by tackling the problem at the level of the leaders in education in different countries. So if they understand the value of what this can do, then you can begin to get international policy change, you begin to get local policy and then regional policy change. That's a long-term program. If you're a teacher there now with children in your class, then about the best we can do probably is to suggest the ways in which the cheapest possible tablets and mobile devices might not be available in some of those areas. Other than that, all I can say is campaign to get better. We've got a campaign going on in London for better broadband. That's going to be going on everywhere. So I'm afraid I don't have a much more comforting answer than that right at the moment. Great,
thank you very much, Diana. So there's a question here from the platform that's linked to that, which is, again, back to the use of mobile devices, and it's about asking whether these VLEs that we've been talking about this week all have mobile accessible versions. And so most people are expecting these days, a native app for VLEs such as Blackboard or Moodle or Canvas, because they want to engage their students in mobile learning. But not all of these proprietary VLE providers have developed native apps. They're much keener, I think, to develop virtual learning environments that will run through dynamic web sites, because it's a better and richer experience. So the question was, do they all have one? The answer is no. And should they? I'm not sure that they always should. So we use Blackboard, a VLE at Leeds, and Blackboard have a mobile app, which is quite poor functionality. It's a cut down version of the full tool, and it can be at best a poor experience for students, and at worst quite a dangerous experience for students, because if the app doesn't provide all of the functionality and all of the tools, and doesn't tell the student, I'm not showing you this tool, the student could arguably miss some really quite important information or activity. So there is a risk in providing apps that don't have the full suite of resources and tools, because obviously a student may get used to using a mobile version of a virtual learning environment. So I think the answer is really to be very careful about making sure that if you are wanting your students to work on a virtual learning environment through a mobile device, that you're confident that it is providing a high quality experience and replicating the kind of functionality that you would have seen if the students were logged in either on a desktop PC. So that's a slight link to the previous question.
Could I come in on another slight link to the previous question?
Please do.
Neil, it's just in relation to what VLEs you can make use of if you're on your own and you don't have the tech support and it's not in your institution. We've recently used Blackboard course sites, which is it's made available for free as a fairly basic version of what Blackboard does. Doesn't do everything, but you can do something really quite respectable with that, so it's worth taking a look. What I'll do is I'll paste the link into the forum, because I think that'll be easier than putting it into the group chat.
Right.
So I'll put it into the live Q&A forum.
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion, and we've used it successfully actually for us on projects here. Thank you. Okay, so there's a question actually in the Q&A, in the live Q&A. So what you can do with this Google tool is you can select the question you want to answer. So if you're watching this in Google, you should see in the top right-hand corner that says currently answering. And it's a question from Anna, who's, I think, just asking for a little bit of background on perhaps on us, on what have we been doing in this area, how long have we been working on this, with a nice compliment, which is always good. So Diana, do you want to say a little bit about how long you've been working on blended learning?
That could be embarrassing. I think I first started using it in the 70s when I was teaching maths, and it was around the time that the Open University was running TV programs, and they had some wonderful computer simulations of mathematical concepts. And I used to record these programs off air and then use them in my lectures. And I think that was a sort of blended learning. It was using technology in traditional teaching mode. And it was that kind of thing that got me hooked in the first place. So I've been using it ever since, one way or another. But I think it's become so much more exciting in the last decade or so, because it's become so much closer to what the teacher can do for themselves. And what's nice about the tools that we're demonstrating in the course is that they're pretty DIY, most of them. They're quite specific. They don't do 101 different things. They do a specific job for you. And there's a nice question that we'll probably come to in a bit about how do you choose the right tool for what you want to do. And the difficulty, of course, is that you have this plethora of tools now. There's so many things coming out. It's rather hard to manage the whole process. But it does mean that you now have this very interesting toy box of things that you can do and experiment with in what you're doing yourself in your courses. So I think over the last few years, that's really changed, along with the fact that teachers have become quite digitally expert in their own lives. You know, we all do online shopping and whatnot, and use online navigation tools and so on and so on. So whereas 10, 15 years ago, teachers were digitally quite unskilled, and trying to say, okay, now start using it in your teaching was a bit of a stretch. That's not really the case anymore, and I really get the impression of participants on this course, for example, you're not shy about using technology. It's much more that you're not quite sure which is the best and really how to make best use of it, and should you be using it at all in certain kinds of classroom context. So those are the questions that we get into discussing. It's not, oh my God, where's the return button or something. It's a very different level of expertise that teachers have now. So I think it's got really exciting over the last few years, and we can, with this kind of platform that we now have, we have the opportunity to hear from the teachers themselves about what your experience is. So it's much more of a sharing. It's not go on a course, go to a workshop, find out how to do it, go back to your own place, and then forget about it. This is running in parallel with the way that you're currently teaching. And we're able to learn from you just in this kind of much more two-way interaction now, which I think is fantastic. I don't know if that answers the question. I can't now remember what the question was. Did that answer it?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
So I'm going to link my experience with a question which is in here. So my background is in science education at HE level, and I started out teaching very much face-to-face in large groups of students, up to about 300 odd students, and in neuroscience. That was my degree training. And the reason I got into this area was because I felt frustrated about my inability to interact with large groups of students, and wanting to have, exactly as Diana's described, that two-way communication, and feeling that everything was just very didactic, that I was just talking at the students and there was 300 faces looking at me. So I started to make use of digital technology to break down those barriers, both in the classroom and using the virtual learning environment. And there's a question in the platform about from somebody who's teaching science, and she or he wants to know about experiences of blended learning in that area. And there are lots of studies of the value of digital technology in the science subjects, in the STEM subjects, and in medicine. Particularly, though academics and practitioners in that area, particularly, well, in HE, as my experience, are very enthusiastic innovators of digital technology and like to try things out because they're quite practically focused. So you often find lots of people doing really exciting stuff. So I thought I'd just give one example, which is not from my own work, but it's from the biology field, where people are using mobile devices in very creative ways in a blended learning context, and using the technology of location tools on mobile devices to do things like classification and tagging. So students are often going out into the field to measure, categorize, count whatever kinds of sample they might be interested in. Let's take plants as an example. And there's fantastic examples in the literature of students who are cataloguing, who are photographing, who are providing narrative and description on mobile devices, and then sharing that with their group or with the whole class, and going back into the clubhouse at the end of the night and collating all of those resources, putting them on a map, sharing them with their teacher, and then writing some kind of collective description of their resources using a blog tool or a wiki tool. And they're fantastic examples of the way that digital technology is really being harnessed to enhance the students' learning outcomes in ways that they really just couldn't have achieved with a piece of pen and paper in the time they have available. So, long story to say, there are many, many examples of really positive examples of blended learning in the sciences, as there are in all disciplines. And that question kind of leads on to a number of questions that are in the platform and that we always get asked is, can you provide us with the research evidence that blended learning is effective? And it's something that I think we probably need to do a little bit more of in the course content ourselves, but we didn't feel that it was something that this audience would particularly feel the need for, is the kind of the literature on the research evidence. But what I've done is posted in the Q&A step of the course a number of links to some very famous papers which do, including a meta-analysis of a number of studies that do show the evidence for the impact of blended learning. But of course, research evidence is always mixed, and research studies in this area are not always as robust and rigorous as they might be. So you do need to take all evidence cautiously. But generally, I think the literature is in agreement that control studies do show a positive impact of blended learning on students' learning outcomes. But it is actually very difficult to measure. It's very difficult to set up a very controlled and rigorous study of learning in a real environment. But there are some papers, there are lots of papers, and I've posted links to a few for you. So what's interesting is that there's quite a few people posting things on the side of this chat as we're speaking. Not necessarily questions, but resources that you might find useful. So Terry McAndrew, who's probably known to a lot of people in the UK, who's actually based at the University of Leeds, but has been with the higher education and TechDis for a number of years, is posting links which you may find useful. And somebody else posted another link about free, Talent LMS is another VLE that can be used for free or very cheaply, a bit like Moodle, and it adjusts to mobile devices. So thank you for those resources that people have provided. Victoria's asked a question about Canvas over Moodle. Now, Diana, I don't know if you feel qualified to answer that, but I have no experience of using either Canvas or Moodle, so not what I can answer. I don't have any
experience of using Canvas, only of Moodle, so I'm afraid I can't speak for Canvas either.
Okay, so I think the answer there, Victoria, is Google. Okay, so we'll move on to see what else we've got in the chat. And another quite common question, actually, that I'm not sure there's always a very easy answer to, because it will be a "it depends" answer. There's a bit of preamble but the question is, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how easy it is to find a balance between being digital and still having traditional teaching materials. And it is that classic age-old, are we advocating the end of traditional and completely digital technology? No, of course, we're not. So if you're not, how much of each is right? So my answer is always, it depends, because it depends on your students, your context, your environment, and most importantly, your learning outcomes. So you need to map what you're trying to achieve with your students to the way in which you're going to support their learning. And sometimes that may be best achieved by technology, and sometimes it will be best achieved with no technology. So that's my answer always. Diana, do you want to add to that?
Yes, well, I can't fault any of that. I mean, sometimes when you get these sort of really tricky questions about new technology, I try going back to asking that same question in the context of old technology. And if you said something like, how do you get the right balance between getting students to work on their own and in groups, or in groups and then whole class, or in the library, or in classrooms, it depends, just as Neil said. So I think you find your way with it, depending on what you and your students and your subject area demand. If you're thinking about what's the best way to get these students engaged, for example, then sometimes technology can be a great way of getting them to start thinking about the rather difficult concept or practice or skill that you're going to introduce them to. They get their hands on trying to think about it prior to the lesson, and then they're kind of ready to hear what you've got to say. If you said, go out and try and analyze this data, for example, and you haven't really given them too many hints about how to do it, they've just got to go and analyze it and see what they can find. They've had a go, they've got something or other, but then when you come in and show them what they can do with some data analysis tool, they're much more ready to hear it than they would be otherwise. So it's your instincts about the pedagogy, as much as anything, that will drive you to saying, well, that I could do online. I could get them working online, I could get them trying out this tool beforehand, I could get them going and looking at this YouTube lecture beforehand, get them thoroughly confused, bring them back, have a small discussion, and then they'll be ready to hear what I've got to tell them. You know, there's those kinds of things which will influence how you balance out the more traditional presentation and small group work in a class with the kinds of things that we can do online. So all I would say is that when I'm running a dual mode course at the moment, so I've got an online course which runs just for those students who are all over the world and not in London, and then a place-based course at the Institute where students come once a week for a class session. And those students are as much online as everybody else is as well, so they mix it up according to how they feel. Students need to be together, it's good to be together. So bring them together as well whenever you can. Mix in the online for what the online does, and you'll find the right sort of balance that's good for you.
Great, thank you very much. So following on from that, and I think a big concern within across the whole of the education sector is that kind of voice that we all have heard from people saying, oh, if I put everything online, I record my classes, then the students won't engage, they won't attend, they won't engage. The question is, can you offer any advice about how to address these concerns? So I'll start, Diana, and please chip in. But this is a perennial issue. I mean, we've launched lecture capture at Leeds in the HE sector in a very big way about 2 years ago, and we had a very strong resistance from academic staff on this question, and as on a load of other questions. And despite the fact that there's actually quite a lot of literature that says that attendance is not reduced by lecture capture recordings if students are properly introduced to the rationale for lecture capture and the reasons for it and the ways it can enhance and supplement attendance at lectures, the evidence is that students will continue to attend. But it's very difficult to convince teachers of this until they've done it for themselves. And so my experience has been that many staff have tried it out, they've taken it on trust that attendance won't drop, and it's been proven true that attendance does not reduce. And we've just finished a big study looking at this from a statistical perspective, and there is no significant difference in attendance across the whole of the university, with many, many recordings. But what I would always say, and this unfortunately happens to anyone who's kind of a head of department, is you will always get students who come to you and say, I will not attend these lectures because the lecturer is reading off the slides and there is no value to me being in the room because I could watch that at ×2 speed in my room afterwards and use my time more effectively. And that can be quite a hard lesson for academics who receive that kind of feedback. But to me, it screams, think about your teaching practice, think about what you're doing in the classroom. There's a time to change, and you should be redesigning your class time to be of most effective use to your students. And think about the fact that your student might have travelled 2.5 hours to get there because of the bus being delayed or the tube being on strike. They want some activity and some engagement of value. So put yourself in their shoes, and if you're going to read off the slides, don't be surprised when the students start not attending your classes. So yeah, that's my bit of a rant on attendance.
Yeah, I think it's only of value, honestly, because the students can go back to that material again. You need to go back to it when you're coming up to revision and for other things, when you didn't get it first time round. So that's only of value for the serious student. I think it's right to worry about the student who procrastinates and thinks, oh, well, I can always watch it online. And that's true of an awful lot of students. It's very easy, if you don't have to do it now, to put it off. And we've experienced that ourselves as academics. You leave it to the last possible moment. People do all the time. So I think helping students not procrastinate is very important. If you've got sort of time-stamped submissions of some kind, no matter how minor, that sort of thing can help to make sure that the student is keeping up with the course, not leaving everything to the last minute. So that's the only thing I would say about it. And that can happen whether or not you've got lecture capture. I mean, that just sort of feeds that kind of activity.
Thank you. And there's a question that was part of another one that I'll just quickly address here, because somebody asked about the impact of digital technology on mixed performance students, and there have been studies of the impact of, like, for example, lecture capture on students who have been struggling to achieve learning outcomes, having a greater benefit than students who are high performing. But there are obviously also other studies that show that well-performing students can achieve value from things like recordings. But so again, it's down to the research evidence. But there are definitely a number of quite good studies that show it can be very beneficial for students who are struggling to achieve their learning outcome. So we've got people. Terry continues to post very useful links. Thank you, Terry. There's a question about e-assessment that I just saw. I don't know where it disappeared. Did you see it? Oh, here we are. Let me select this. So this is a question that's just come in on the Q&A. The question says, we're heading more to e-assessments, online assessing our students, instead of written tests in the International Baccalaureate system. Is this a positive way forward? Well, it depends, doesn't it, on what you're trying to achieve. If you're trying to achieve efficiency and cost savings, and moving to e-assessment certainly does that, it may not be the right thing to do. But if you are trying to enhance the assessment practices and the feedback mechanisms, both the quality and the timeliness of feedback, as well as achieve efficiency, then that's in the student interest and would to me seem a positive way forward. And I caveat like that because I know a number of institutions who have pushed towards e-assessment purely for financial efficiency reasons, and it has not been in the student interest or indeed in the teaching staff interest. It's been purely for efficiency means, and that is not a positive move in my opinion. But e-assessment generally can be incredibly effective for students. I mean, just this question is specifically about e-assessment, not the end-to-end process, but e-assessment has got so many possibilities for us in personalized and adaptive learning. If you can imagine the way a student might demonstrate their having achieved a learning outcome through any online assessment, which can then branch into alternative questions, can take them into different types of media, different types of assessment according to their achievement, and that will be a completely a different journey for every student according to the kind of questions that they're answering. And you can adapt the way that students are receiving those questions in different media according to their particular needs. So e-assessment can really provide flexibility and support inclusiveness, but most excitingly for me, can really start to get us towards much more personalised adaptive assessment, much more real-world assessment. But it has to be done really carefully with the learning outcomes absolutely at the centre, and not from an efficiency perspective.
I think you're talking about formative assessment, Neil. Are you there?
Either formative or summative.
Because that branching right, would make it the sequence of the material, the time you spend on each part of it would make it more adaptive to the learner's performance.
Yeah.
So that would be helpfully formative.
Yeah.
One of the problems with the assessment is that so much of it uses multiple choice questions, and I've never felt that's a great form of assessment. Not least because it invites learners to think about wrong answers, and it just seems unreasonable. Nonetheless, it does provide efficiency, and students do actually like the opportunity to be tested. And we found people pressing for more quizzes on this platform, and this platform can't do very much more than offer things like multiple choice quizzes. But they just seem quite inadequate for a lot of the kinds of things that we want to test. But for the student, sometimes it takes you back to the material, you realize you didn't quite master it, or you didn't quite get the point as well as you thought you had. So it's a very good reflective process for them sometimes if they use it properly. But if the question is really relating to summative assessment, then I would want to know what kind of assessment it is, because I just don't think multiple choice is good enough for that. Even though it's used a lot, and it really is used a lot.
Great, thank you. Right, where to go next? I got distracted reading something on Twitter, which I shouldn't have done. Oh yes, this is a question that I prepped Diana for, or not prepped, prompted Diana to look at earlier because I thought it was quite a challenging one. So what are awarding bodies doing to contribute resources and materials for teachers and lecturers to use in preparing resources that are appropriate for their qualifications?
Yes, that is a tricky one, not least because I don't think they do a great deal to foster the use of technology. And very often the awarding body structure and qualifications will go ahead defining standards and what you've got to, the standards you've got to get your students to, without any reference to what digital technologies are now offering. So that both undermines and undervalues the kinds of things which actually students could probably be quite skilled at, and loses opportunities, and it might be paying in some cases too much attention to the kinds of things that actually you don't need to spend so much time on because you've got digital technologies. Certainly in the workplace, it's very hard to find any kind of job that doesn't require some aspect of using digital technology these days. I mean, many jobs require at least the basic capability with that. So I think it's going to become increasingly important for awarding bodies to look at that. For anyone who's interested in the UK context, we've had a recent report out called the Skills Plan, just came out last week, and it's very hard to find anything in there about digital skills, generally speaking. I mean, there's, of course, the digital sector of the market of those kinds of jobs, but since digital penetrates all jobs now, you would expect that there's a certain basic level of digital skill that everybody's going to need. So that should be in whatever qualification you're getting. However, right now in the UK, all these awarding bodies are under review and under scrutiny. Those are going to be redefined and recategorized according to the industrial sector that they're going to be relevant to. So I would hope that as part of that process, there would be a greater recognition of the importance of what awarding bodies can do. Because at the moment, a lot of the time, in fact, it was in the original action group that was set up by the skills minister in the UK, about 3-4 years ago, which led to the development of this course, because there was a recognition that the teaching workforce in vocational education and training sector needs to be using these kinds of things. Even so, it's taken an immense amount of time to try and persuade people to be focusing on that, and you can look all over the place in policy documents and not find any proper representation of what the awarding bodies should be doing. So I think it's worth pressing them to be doing more. But as I said, they're going to be changing in this country at least over the next few years now.
Great.
I can't speak for other countries, I'm afraid. I've got no idea.
Thank you, Diana. So Terry McAndrew, who's kindly posting links for us, has asked a question, so I feel we should answer his question in return. He asks, I'll just select this is in the Google one. He asks, how can reward and recognition for staff be improved to encourage innovation from the chalk face in a safe manner, i.e. with reasonable risk? And this is a common question that I get asked across the higher education sector in the UK of what can we do to foster that innovation and encourage teaching staff to not only to take risks with their teaching practice, but also to feel that what they're doing is valued by immediate senior managers and by the university and the sector generally. Now, I think in the last 5 years, this has improved considerably. Certainly, I've experienced a lot of change within the higher education sector towards more recognition of people who are innovative in their teaching practice. And there are now a number of opportunities within many universities for teaching development grants, teaching development awards, buying out of time, safe spaces to try out projects and to be allowed to fail in those innovations, and indeed promotion pathways for teaching focused or teaching and scholarship staff, indeed all the way up to professorial level in a number of universities. Now that's the kind of scenario that we need to encourage to become sector-wide and actually cross-sector, so we need to see that happening in all of the education sectors. And that again is a government level policy thing. And in HE, in the UK, we will be under the auspices of the Teaching Excellence Framework in the next few years, which is the government's attempt to do exactly this, to raise the bar on teaching quality and to provide recognition to individuals through their universities for the quality of the education that they offer to students, and indeed controversially to link that to rises in tuition fees, which I did notice on the BBC News just half an hour ago. Some universities have taken the decision to speculatively raise their fees for 17-18 in advance of any government decision on this, which was quite quite exciting. But yeah, I think the answer is, Terry, things are improving, but what we need to do is see that spreading across the sector and across sectors of education.
There's also the CMALT qualification for that recognises blended learning and what you've done in this area. If you look towards the end of the course, I think probably in the final step, or I can't quite remember which step it is, but or the beginning of the course, there is information about CMALT, because you can use the work that you've done on this course to work towards that kind of qualification, certification of your accomplishments in blended learning. Because what you're doing is putting together a portfolio of what you've done, the way you've experimented, and what you've got from your learners. So that's one way. Of course, there's PGCE qualifications. I mean, anybody who's coming into the profession for the first time will have that opportunity. And other than that, I think it's really going to be very dependent on the way in which a particular college runs. I think this is probably going to get better in the future, but I don't see very much coming out at the moment that gives enough recognition to the value of experimentation and innovation in this sector. It's very hard to achieve that. Not very hopeful, that, is it?
I think we're paid to be honest.
I can't paint a rosier picture at the moment.
So thank you. I'm now going in, just having a look at the live Q&A steps. So there's a number of 4 different sources of people posting questions, which is starting to give me a bit of a headache. But Miriam, in the live Q&A slot in the platform, is saying, again, thank you for the feedback. Really enjoying the online session. Q&A is excellent. Her question is, she doesn't have a question. It's a rhetorical question. She says, "Can't believe that this course is free. How is this possible?" Well, I suppose it is a question, isn't it? How is this course free? It's free because it's funded by the UFI Trust, whose mission is to do exactly what this course is doing, which is to embed and enhance practitioners' use of digital technology to support their learners. So it's free to all of you as participants, because the UFI Trust have funded the course for Diana and I to design and build it and deliver it on the FutureLearn platform in combination with a huge number of other people behind the scenes. And so the UFI are passionate about supporting this sector. Thankfully, somebody is out there to support this sector and its practitioners. So free to the end user, but obviously not free to create. John Thomas has just asked on the platform, what app would you recommend for student interaction on their mobile devices? I think a number of people answer this actually in the platform each time the course runs, and I probably think the number one recommendation for people is Nearpod. Nearpod's a very popular app, largely in the K-12 or school level sector, but we're also using it in the HE sector. I know a number of people are as well. It's a really nice app for collaboration, interaction, group working and sharing. It can be used for didactic delivery of content from the teacher, so the teacher can control what students are seeing, indeed the pace of what they're seeing, but it also has a built-in a large number of tools for interaction and collaboration and quizzing. And I really like using it with students to get them to work collaboratively in a small group to develop a concept, often through a diagram, so that they can sit in a small group on their device, and I can provide them with a kind of a template diagram of something that I want them to understand, and they can iterate it, they can develop that diagram, add additional content in their group, they can share that back with me, and I can then present that to the group, and then we can discuss it. And it's a really nice tool, very easy to use, and it really gets that social interaction, that discussion, that group working, all happening simultaneously. And it's a really easy to use tool, and it's free, which is a bonus.
Well, it sounds great. I haven't used it. You've now persuaded me I'm going to try it.
So I am.
We haven't got it in the course, have we?
We briefly mention it as an example, but not enough detail. But everyone always picks up on it and says, yeah, this is a great tool.
That's right. Thank you.
Another convert. There's another question in the platform which is a bit specific, but it's this is one of the questions I think we need to get the community to answer. So OER is relevant to Japanese language courses. I think I can't answer the question. Somebody else on the platform may be able to. What I'll do with these kinds of questions as well is tweet them afterwards to see if people can answer specifically. But it does raise the broader question of finding OERs, and OER repositories can be quite difficult. And that does link to a question that we had earlier, which is how do I choose, how do I find, and how do I know that they're of good quality? And one of our aims in this course is to try to build up this kind of repository, but also a social community where people can provide us with these kind of links and their views about them, and we can start to try and collate them and give people the opportunity to interact within their disciplines, within the sector, to form that kind of community of practice. Now, it's not something that we've been able to do yet within the course, but it's something that's definitely on our longer term agenda, because people are very generous, as you've already seen in this chat, with information and links that we have never seen or found, and they put them into the course and they provide some context with them. And we really would like to find a way to collate those for the community in an ongoing and social way, as another example of the way that you can do this with your learners. Did you want to add anything, Diana? You're just nodding, which will take us.
No, I was just agreeing. I thought that was very good. But I was just thinking about choosing the right technology, which you touched on, because there was a question about that.
Yeah.
What are the right criteria?
Yeah.
To use, and I don't think we've developed criteria, and this is another of those perennial questions. But I think there's an approach to it, and I might try posting this as a comment. But if you think about what you're trying to do with your learners, I mean, what are the difficulties with saying use this technology for this kind of learning session or something? Is that whatever mapping you do, you can always find ways in which you would use that technology in actually practically any other kind of session as well, because there are so many ways in which you can mix the things up. So I think it's better to think of it rather in terms of the way in which you approach design and what you're going to do. So you think about what's the learning outcome you're trying to achieve, what does it take for those learners to get there, what kinds of activities do they need to do? Is it becoming aware of something, is it practicing something, is it just sharing ideas? Is it trying to get deeply into understanding a concept, or is it more about learning a procedure and becoming fluent with the procedure, whatever it happens to be? So you're clear about what kinds of activities they need to be doing, and then think of a technology you know that would do it, and then think about what makes that technology good at doing that, and then what more it ought to do to be better. So that generates your list of criteria, which you then go and look for, or you give to your students to say it should do this, 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 and this. And the kinds of things that you would have would be things like the nature of the activity they have to do. So is it a discussion activity, or is it a presentation activity, or are they producing something like on a Padlet wall or something? What is it? Does it store it in the place that's convenient? Is it easy to use, familiar enough to them that the technology won't be a barrier? Easy to access, so wherever they are they can use it. It's flexible, it's accessible, it's personalizable. That might be another important point. Is it likely to be useful to them again, or is this a one-off, having to learn this technology and then they'll never use it again? But if it's something like a presentation tool, or it's a reference manager tool or something like that, that will actually be something they should always have to hand, then it would be a very good thing to do. So it should be one that they could continue using. Is it reusable for them? Is it reusable for you? Is it something your colleagues use so you can go and get help if you need it? Is there technical support available? Is it interoperable with other technologies? So there's a whole list of things of that kind that are going to be important to you and important to them. So I think it'd be worth just posting that, and then we can share that. I don't think it should be on a Padlet wall, or it should be on a... I'll put it in a forum anyway to begin with, because it's so much more about what you want to do with your learners than it is about having a kind of mapping of standard, use this for this. I don't think that would work.
Great, thank you very much. So we're getting to the end of our time with you. So just to wrap up, and there's always a question on the platform about whether this will be available. So those of you that are live, hopefully will know that this recording will now instantly, as soon as we close the session, be available on YouTube. So you feel free to watch that back or to share it. And if you're watching this as a recording, you will know a recording exists. And we do actually also have recordings of all of the other Q&As that we've done as part of this course. This is actually the third run of Blended Learning Essentials. And we do a Q&A on each of those. And each time there are different questions and different discussions and different priorities. So if you're interested in this kind of format, you might want to go back and find them. The links are within the course. So just to wrap up by saying thank you very much for joining us. At our peak, we had just around 30 people in the Google Live thing, and we always find that there was a lot of people watching it on YouTube afterwards. So it's been a great experience for us. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the course. We'll be interacting with you again in a couple of weeks live on another Q&A towards the end of the course. And then, of course, we've got Blended Learning Essentials 2 embedding practice running later in the year, and we hope to see you there. So I'll leave Diana to say goodbye.
Yes, goodbye, and thank you for all the questions. They were quite challenging, quite tricky to answer in some places. Wish we could have more positive answers, but we'll do our best to get as much of this as we can back into the platform now. So thanks again.
Okay, thank you and goodbye.